throughout the past 2 decades have been posed the greatest seismic hazard. And so in particular, we can see that Sumatra is of particular concern. All right, so here we have a couple of seismicity cross-section profiles across Sumatra. We have 4 different profiles along the Sunda Trench and some corresponding cross-section profiles to the right. At the northeastmost profile, cross-section A to A prime, we can see that there's a strong Benioff zone with seismic activity reaching approximately 250 kilometers depth. There's a dense clustering of shallow seismic activity that can be seen, and intermediate events are experiencing this sort of bulge-shaped feature from approximately 100 to 200 kilometers. This potentially could be related to a kink or a tear in the slab. Profile B to B prime shows a strong Benioff zone with similar maximum depths, about 220 kilometers. Both shallow and intermediate depth earthquakes are numerous here. Many of the shallow events along this profile could be suggestive of megathrust activity related to large 2004 magnitude 9.1 Sumatran earthquake event. There's an increased number of volcanic activity additionally along this profile. So here, continuing on, we have seismicity across profile C prime and D prime. These are representative of southern Sumatra. So profile C prime records seismic activity where most events don't penetrate 200 kilometers depth, with one kind of anomalous event here. The profile records a Benioff zone that increases slab dip angle slowly eastward towards Java. There's an apparent increase in shallow seismic activity here, and there seems to be a decrease in intermediate events. So profile D prime shows a Benioff zone that extends down to approximately 300 kilometers. Very similar to C prime, but one thing of note here is that the dip angle of the subducting slab is beginning to increase, moving once again eastward towards Java. So we have a kind of steepening of the subducting slab. So now we're along Java. So again, we have 4 profiles along the Sunda Trench near Java, and we have their corresponding seismicity cross sections on the right. So first we have cross section E to E prime, and that records a Benioff zone with maximum depths reaching approximately 660 kilometers depth, so much deeper than Sumatra. There's a large, very noticeable gap in seismic activity from about 400 kilometers to 600 kilometers. An event activity appears to decrease with depth. Cross-section F to F prime records a Benioff zone with a similar pattern to E prime. Seismicity again extends to 660 kilometers, this time with a zone of aseismic activity between 250 to 500 kilometers. Events reach a maximum depth of about 660 kilometers. And below 500 kilometers, there actually appears to be a pretty substantial increase in deep events. So now moving on to G prime. Both these profiles represent Eastern Indonesia. Cross-section G prime records a Benioff zone that extends down to approximately 550 kilometers depth. The zone of aseismic activity here is smaller, about 380 kilometers to 500 kilometers, that sort of range. There's much less shallow seismic activity here. And though there is shallow seismic activity in the back arc, this could be representative of back arc thrusting potentially. Cross-section H to H prime records a strong Benioff zone that extends to nearly 600 kilometers. The dip of the subducting slab has increased here substantially to nearly vertical. The zone of aseismic activity is now between about 300 kilometers and 400 kilometers. And shallow seismic activity has dramatically increased with numerous clusters of shallow seismic activity in what appears to be the forearc and some seismic activity in the back arc as well. So here's some focal mechanisms taken from Hutching and Mooney, 2021. The shallow seismicity here, which in this case refers to events less than 70 kilometers depth, is often the most abundant form of seismicity in Indonesia. Oftentimes, it can be more indicative of plate motions and deformation near the surface. Additionally, these events can pose a greater seismic hazard because of the proximity of the hypocenter to the surface. So understanding them is vital. So here we have GCMT focal mechanisms for events less than 70 kilometers depth, and that's from January 2000 to July 2020, and that's for all events greater than magnitude 5.0. So we can see along the Sunda Trench near Sumatra, we have shallow thrust faulting mechanisms along the outer arc ridge. They appear to have a general northwest strike, and they're dipping to the northeast. These events are the dominant mechanism here and likely represent the Sunda megathrust. Megathrusting activity occurs along the shallow plate interface between the subducting plate and the overriding plate, essentially allowing it to behave as a large-scale thrust fault and responding to the movement of the plate. Many of the largest earthquakes generated have been associated with a megathrust source. Additionally, we see strike slip activity visible along the Sumatran fault system. So, and also along north-south trending faults in the Indian Ocean. Along the subduction zone at Sumatra, we have oblique convergence that's divided amongst the trench, but additionally among the Sumatran fault. It's a right lateral strike slip fault. So that convergence is being split between the trench and the fault system. We have a similar thing here just across Java. So similarly, here again, we have GCMT focal mechanisms for events less than 70 kilometers depth from January 2000 to July 2020. So for all events greater than magnitude 5.0. So thrust faulting along the Java Trench is much more subdued. And we have much less events when compared to Sumatra. As the convergent angle becomes less oblique along the trench nearing Java, thrusting mechanisms decline, and now we're beginning to see normal faulting begin to dominate, particularly along the outer rise faulting area. These normal faulting events can be seen, like I mentioned, along the outer rise faulting area, and they form a narrow trench parallel seismic zone on the oceanic plate here. Outer rise faulting can often provide an idea to the state of stress on the megathrust. So a large number of outer rise normal faulting events combined with few megathrust events often suggest weak coupling along the megathrust. And when there's a large number of reverse faulting events in the outer rise, it suggests a strong coupling. So in this case, we have a lack of large megathrust events and an abundance of outer rise normal faulting events from Java to Sumba. So this suggests weak coupling on the eastern Sunda megathrust. Very briefly, I wanted to mention, or I wanted to look at a map of lithospheric age along the Sunda Trench, the Sunda Java Trench. Near northwest Sumatra, we have the age of oceanic lithospheric ranges from approximately 40 to 60 million years. But we can see that there's a increase moving eastward towards Java. Along Java, we have lithospheric ages in excess of 100 million years. So this is a critical parameter because the age of the lithosphere could influence the style of tectonism occurring in the region. So we have young oceanic lithosphere that's typically hot and buoyant, while older lithosphere tends to be colder and less buoyant. So additionally, there have been some studies that show that mantle upwelling beneath northwest Sumatra has caused an increase in mantle temperature relative to Java. And deep seismicity is highly dependent on temperature. So this means that deep seismicity can't be generated because deformation is occurring in a ductile manner along Sumatra, where it's suggested that the mantle temperature is higher. And thus the tectonic parameter mentioned here, both of them are very important in determining the structure of the subduction zone along the convergent margin. And then quickly, I thought we could compare the slab geometry along the trench to some tectonic models that have been proposed. So the image here is a simplified 3D model from Holland-Spackman 2015. It's based on an analysis of seismic tomography. So both images are the same model, they're just viewing from different directions. So the one on the left is viewing roughly southwest, and the one on the right is viewing roughly southeast. The model shows the geometry of the subducting slab at the Sunda Java Trench from Sumatra to the Banda Sea, where the maximum depth here shown is 600 kilometers. So according to their model, they suggest that the region of West Java shows the subduction that is the simplest. Subduction along this area of West Java is nearly orthogonal, and the slab dips at about 20 degrees from the trench to the volcanic arc. And then beyond the volcanic arc, it increases from 60 to 70 degrees into the upper mantle. So this is very similar to the seismicity profiles that we looked at across Java. Beneath East Java, the gap that was observed in the seismicity cross sections is visible in the model from approximately 250 to 500 kilometers depth. The model here suggests that the zone of aseismic activity beneath East Java is actually a hole in the slab that has an along strike length of about 400 kilometers. So the cause of this hole in the slab is debated, but they interpret the results to be associated with positive buoyant lithosphere that entered the trench and subducted to its current depth. Along Sumatra, the geometry from the model is very similar to what can be observed in the seismic profiles from shallow to intermediate depths. The model here suggests a tear in the slab beneath northwest Sumatra, where it extends to relatively shallow depths. This tear may be visible in the seismic profile A to A prime, where we saw a slight bulge in the profile. So that's what we potentially could be seeing here. The tear in the slab could help explain the lack of deep seismicity in the region, though. The tear could facilitate mantle upwelling through the tear, causing warming of the mantle, and ultimately not facilitating brittle deformation at deeper depths. So to conclude, Western Indonesia is one of the most seismically active regions in the world. The style of seismicity here is linked to the tectonic and other associated parameters in the region. For shallow seismicity, the focal mechanisms reveal that seismic activity is diverse, particularly along Java. Along Sumatra, earthquake activity is primarily dominated by megathrust mechanisms. Along Java, we see a transition from megathrust-related activity in the west, where it begins to decrease eastward, facilitating normal faulting, and eventually becoming the dominant mechanism. For intermediate to deep events, we see that the frequency of events is high across Java. We see maximum depths of 500 to 600 kilometers. And then that begins to decrease westward towards Sumatra, where seismic events reach a maximum depth of 200 to 250 kilometers. And this is likely due to numerous factors, some of those being oblique convergence, decreases in lithospheric age, decreasing plate velocity, and increased mantle temperature. Seismic gaps are prevalent in the Benioff zones along East Java, and the tomographic model suggests that some of these zones of aseismic activity may indeed be holes or tears in the slab. The tomographic model used in conjunction with seismic profiling helps to confirm the existence of holes beneath East Java and potentially a tear in the slab beneath Northwest Sumatra. Thank you. That's all I prepared.
Okay, such a nice presentation, Hunter. Ladies and gentlemen, for your info, Mr. Hunter Martin is a research geologist and with the USGS Earthquake Science Center in California, right, Hunter?
That's correct, yes.
If you want to discuss later, you can contact in the specialist contact. We can give it to you all, okay? And for the next, I think better we continue for the next speaker. Is it okay, Hunter? You can wait for the next discussion. So ladies and gentlemen, you can prepare your questions based on the time for today. For the next, for this next speaker is Dr. Belle Sobian, is a research geologist with the USGS Earthquake Science Center in California also. And her PhD thesis work, Paleoseismology in Indonesia, North America, and elsewhere. Dr. Belle, is it you? So there? You want to start it now?
Yes. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's clear. Okay, time is yours, Dr. Belle.
Okay. Can you see my laser pointer?
Yes. Yes, it's clear.
Great. Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and selamat pagi. Today I will present. Today I will present my a summary of a large body of work that was done over the past several decades, summarizing today many papers written not only by me, but also by my colleagues in our research group, Aaron Meltzner, Danny Natawajaya, Judy Zachariasen, and Carrie C., in addition to a large number of collaborators, both in Indonesia, in Taiwan, and elsewhere. So I will focus in on the history of large earthquakes along the Sumatran Sunda Megathrust. Hunter pointed out a few of these in one of his earlier slides. So I will present what we've been able to learn about the history of earthquakes on the Sunda Megathrust using coral microatolls, and what we've learned about not only Sumatra, but what that's taught us about earthquake and fault behavior elsewhere in the world. So first of all, as the motivation for this, it's of course very important to fully characterize the seismic cycle. If you don't understand all of the potential things that can happen, you can have tragic surprises. So as everyone here is, I'm sure, well aware, before the 2004 Aceh Andaman earthquake and tsunami, this area was thought to be largely aseismic by many scientists. Nevertheless, there was quite a bit of geologic evidence from corals and tsunami deposits of previous events that were similar to the 2004 earthquake. But in general, that knowledge had not been transferred in a way that allowed the anticipation of that event. And this is not only a problem in Indonesia. Similarly, in Japan, prior to the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, there had been many earthquakes in this area with tsunamis, but it was thought to be limited to magnitude 8.5. There was not an anticipation that you could have an earthquake of magnitude 9 in this area. But again, there was geologic evidence from tsunami deposits of earthquakes of a similar size as the 2011 event. And because these earthquakes and tsunamis were not anticipated, of course, there were really tragic and devastating results. So in order to anticipate the future events, the earthquake recurrence questions that we would like to answer are, we would like to know what is the largest or longest rupture that can occur on a given fault or a fault system. We'd also like to know what are the shortest or are more typical rupture sizes, because maybe those are more frequent and might present a more frequent hazard. We'd like to know what is the distribution of recurrence intervals. Do the earthquakes occur very regularly, or could there be more variability in the time between events? And we'd also like to know, do these earthquakes tend to occur in temporal clusters? And if so, how are those ruptures distributed in space? Do they all occur at the same point, or are they clustered in time but in different locations? So as we'll see, the answers to each of these questions has implications both for earthquake hazard and for the science of fault mechanics. So one concept that's very important to answering these questions is the idea of a rupture barrier or a segment boundary. So the idea with this is these are points that are along the fault interface where earthquake ruptures tend to stop. And we can divide these into three categories. One would be persistent. In this case, this is a point where very rarely or never does an earthquake cross this point on the fault. That would indicate that there is something about the geology or the structure that is controlling the earthquakes and causing them not to be able to pass that point. And this is what produces the limits on the maximum magnitude or the rupture length. Similarly, but less strong, would be a frequent rupture barrier. In this case, ruptures often stop at that location, but occasionally they would be traversed. And again, this was indicating some kind of structural or geologic control, but probably the state of stress on the fault is an additional factor controlling whether a given earthquake is able to pass that point. And this might define the typical, but not the maximum rupture that is possible. Finally, if the location of the barrier changes from cycle to cycle, then that is what we might call an ephemeral barrier. The rupture limits are controlled almost entirely by the distribution of stress, and the hazard is going to depend very heavily on the specifics of the previous ruptures that happened rather than anything that we could map out in the geology. In terms of patterns of earthquake occurrence, what is a supercycle? Let's talk about that. So this is a word that has kind of proliferated in the scientific community recently, but many people use it to mean different things. So the definition that can encompass all of those is that a supercycle is a repeating period of strain, accumulation, and release that involves multiple earthquakes. That's very general, but that's really the only definition that's broad enough to encompass all the ways the word has been used. So let's look a few. It's more useful when we're talking about these things to be more specific about the behavior that we're describing. So here are a few specific examples of types of supercycles. So in these pictures, the fault line will be along the vertical axis here, and time is on the horizontal axis. So if we have earthquakes that are occurring in clusters, but each of the earthquakes ruptures essentially the same part of the fault, we might call those clustered similar ruptures. Differently, if we have clusters, but each earthquake is dominantly rupturing a different part of the fault, we might call these clustered complementary ruptures or rupture cascades. And another variety would be that we have two kind of families of ruptures. They're occurring more frequently on this part of the fault and less frequently extend to the southern part of the fault. We might call that a superimposed cycle. That is, you have one cycle here, and that is superimposed on a longer cycle here. And that could occur along strike or along dip on the fault. Now, all of these have been described as supercycles, indicated by the purple arrows. Those are those longer periods of strain accumulation and release. But as we can see, each of these actually has pretty different implications, both for the hazard and for the fault mechanics that are underlying them. So in the case of clustered similar ruptures, you have these accelerated periods of strain release. Each earthquake is not completely releasing the strain that's available, the energy that's available, and the hazard will strongly depend on whether a cluster is ongoing or not. And very importantly, the occurrence of one earthquake doesn't actually reduce hazard for that part of the fault. In fact, it increases it, because once you have one earthquake, you're more likely to have more in the same place. In the regime of cascading ruptures, this is more analogous to a simple cycle of strain accumulation and release, in that you would have near complete release of strain in each earthquake, and the recurrence of one earthquake does reduce hazard in that area, but it actually increases it in the neighboring areas. So once this earthquake occurs, this next segment of the fault is more likely to have an earthquake there soon. In the case of these superimposed cycles, that indicates there's some kind of different rheology or frictional properties on different parts of the fault interface, which is leading them to have different recurrence intervals. And the seismic hazard in this area will depend on both of these cycles. A few other varieties of behavior we could have, kind of a different type of superimposed cycle could be rare multi-asperity ruptures. So maybe more commonly, the fault breaks in several different events, but more rarely there will be one large event that goes through the entire fault. And you could have, so this again is described as supercycles, but it could also have a clustered complementary cycle inside. So in that case, you really have kind of a superimposed supercycles, if you were. So this possibly also has incomplete release of strain in each earthquake. Barriers to rupture are occasionally overcome. So those would be frequent barriers rather than persistent barriers. And the hazard will depend on understanding all of these cycles that are going on at the same time. Now, things could be more simple. You don't have to have supercycles. Maybe you just have very easily understood quasi-periodic recurrence of similar ruptures. In this case, the fault interface seems to behave as a single asperity. It's probably fairly homogeneous. and the hazard is pretty easily understood. Finally, we could have no observable pattern, something that's difficult to understand. And in that case, it's also, in this case, it's probably dominated by those ephemeral barriers to rupture. Stress state is the dominant factor here, and it's difficult to anticipate what's going to occur next. So in order to figure out which of these patterns applies to different faults around the world, we need long, spatially distributed, high temporal resolution earthquake records. For instance, if you have a really short earthquake record indicated by this green line, it might not be obvious that you have clustered ruptures at all. You might think that actually these are just quasi-periodic ruptures if you don't know about the longer history of earthquakes. Even if you have a long history, you might not, if you have only one study site, you might not be able to tell the difference between these two cases if your site happens to be in an area where neighboring ruptures tend to overlap. So we really want as much data as possible to be able to distinguish these different types of behavior. So this brings us to the Sumatran Sunda megathrust, because it turns out this is a really fantastic natural laboratory to study and establish earthquake recurrence and rupture patterns. We have, of course, the modern observations of great earthquakes all along the megathrust. We have the islands that are located right above the seismogenic zone, which provide a basis for observation. And very importantly, we have coral microatolls, which, as we'll see, provide detailed records of multiple seismic cycles. So let me see if I can play this little video. Hopefully you can see this. So this is showing what is happening on the islands above the locked part of the fault. So during the interseismic period, this island is sinking because it's being elastically dragged down by the subducting plate. When the earthquake happens, you can see that the island suddenly popped up and a tsunami was generated. This will play again with showing what you would see in terms of the deformation on the surface if you had some GPS stations, or as it turns out, corals located at these locations. So if you're a coral living on this area, you might be doing fine as long as the land is going down, but once the island pops up, the corals are lifted out of the water and are killed. If I can go to the next slide here. Okay, so during the 2005 earthquake in the islands of Nias and Simeulue, this is a map showing the yellow areas which were uplifted during that earthquake, and in the blue areas, they subsided. So if we look at the coral reefs in that area, in the yellow areas here, the entire reef was lifted out of the water and the corals were killed. Whereas in the blue areas, the corals sank farther down under the water. They're still doing fine, but the trees along the coastline were drowned and killed. To show the longer cycle of this subsidence and uplift, this is a photo of islands before the 2005 earthquake. So this is in January of 2005. And what you can see here is a coconut palm orchard that had been planted many decades previous, but was now, because the island was just gradually subsiding over many years, the orchard had become flooded and the trees died. After the earthquake, this island was uplifted by over a meter, such that it was totally above dry land again. So we can find records of that cycle in the past by looking at individual coral colonies. So we look for hemispherical growing corals. Dominantly, Paraides lutea is the species that we use. And we can go and sample them to find records of past earthquakes and deformation. So our field surveying, we use helicopters and boats to go and find places where the corals are preserved. If we find them, we survey them very accurately. and then take samples using hydraulic chainsaws to get a radial slice, which is showing the growth of the coral over time. So this is showing that where a radial slice has been extracted, and this is what the slice looks like after we take it out. After that, we take a very, very thin slice, which we can take an X-ray of the coral, and this shows us the annual bands, like tree rings, which give us this very, very precise history of events. So in this case, we're looking at a coral that was growing in the intertidal zone. So the top of the coral was being affected by the relative sea level. And what you can see here is it was gradually growing higher and higher and higher every year, indicating that the land was gradually sinking. Then at some point, the coral died, indicating that it had been uplifted, in this case, by an earthquake. The other thing that we can do with corals, which is really helpful, is collect samples for uranium thorium dating, which gives a very precise age of when these events happened in the past. So just to give a example of one of these interpretations, this is a coral from North Bagai Island. During the early part of its life, it was going up and up and up and up. And then in approximately 1797, almost all of the coral died, only a small part remained alive because it had been uplifted in an earthquake. And after that, it grew up and up and up again, and then was uplifted again and totally died in 1833. So we can measure the height of the coral in each year, and we determine from that both the rate of subsidence, in this case about 1 centimeter per year, the amount of uplift that occurred in the earthquake, and in this case, we know the timing of the earthquakes from historical records, but we could also determine the timing during prehistoric times when we do not have historical records. So you might be thinking, what about sea level change? Because of course, these corals are tracking the relative sea level, which is combines both the land change and the sea change. So if we know this rate of sea level change, we can correct for that in the deformation rates. But unfortunately, in Sumatra, these are generally not very well constrained. However, that doesn't prevent us from making interpretations. Any sudden large changes that are not recovered within a few years pretty much have to be a tectonic event. It's not possible to get that from sea level change. And also, sea level change is a much broader process which would affect all of our sites equally. So any difference in motion between two sites in the same region has to be due to tectonics. It does mean that we need to be careful if we're comparing a deformation rate from one era to another, because in that case, there could have been different rates of sea level change between those two times. So by compiling coral records from all of these islands, this is the history of earthquake events that we have compiled. In the period before about 1750, that is based on uranium thorium dating and coral annual bands, and after that is confirmed by reliable historical records. So each of the black lines on this plot is an intermediate depth earthquake. The blue lines are shallow earthquakes, also called tsunami earthquakes, and orange lines are deeper events. Not as deep as the ones in the Benioff zones talked about in Hunter's talk. These are all still happening on the Megathrust interface. Oh, and the purple lines, such as the 2004 earthquake, are very broad events that span the entire width of the fault zone. So one of the major conclusions that we've come to is there do seem to be some persistent barriers to rupture along Indonesia, or one located at Simelu, one in the Batu Islands, and potentially another one at Enggano Island, though we don't have as much data there. So we never see an earthquake that crosses one of these points, and we see many earthquake ruptures that end at these points. We also note that these barriers are associated with smaller earthquakes, these magnitude 7.5-ish earthquakes and with reduced interseismic coupling, which is indicated by the green bars along the edge here. So that is suggesting that these areas have the geology there is somehow inhibiting earthquakes from proceeding through, although some smaller earthquakes can still happen there. You might also note that we don't see any earthquake that crosses this entire Mentawai segment. So there are three segments divided by the barriers: the Aceh-Andaman segment, the Nias segment, and the Mentawai segment. We'll talk more in detail about what seems to be happening here, but it's a little bit different from the other barriers in that there is quite a lot of overlap between events that approach it from both sides. So could there be a connection with the structure in the subducting plate? This is something that's been debated quite a bit. There's a lot of fracture zones and the fossil ridge here that are subducting, which could be related to creating these barriers. So there are fracture zones associated with the three persistent barriers. There's also the fossil ridge, which is associated with the Batu Islands barrier, but it's not very clear cut because there are also lots of other fracture zones. For example, several up here that are within the 2004 rupture that obviously didn't stop the 2004 rupture from happening, from propagating through. So there might be some relationship here, but it's not very clear cut. We can't go and say, oh, there's a fracture zone here. Obviously the earthquakes will stop there. In terms of earthquake rupture patterns, we have some very incredible cascades. So clustered complementary ruptures. Each of these is rupturing a different area of the fault, but almost the entire length of the Sumatran Sunda megathrust has ruptured since 2000, with only one gap in the northern Mentawai area here. There is kind of a more loose maybe cascade in the around the year 1400, but this is much more spread out. So maybe that is that's not as definite as a cascade as this modern example is. So definitely we could say that once one earthquake occurs here, it's very likely that that's going to trigger others in neighboring areas. So I'll review the what's happened in each of the segments in turn. So first of all, the Aceh-Andaman segment is kind of the one we know the least about, in part because we don't have any micro-atoll data from the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. They're not part of Indonesia, and it's very difficult to get permission to go there. But we do know from historical records that prior to 2004, there were a number of smaller earthquakes in this area, but none of them, or even taken all together, they were nothing like the 2004 rupture. They were much, much smaller. The last event similar to 2004 probably occurred around 1450. That one might have even been larger than the 2004 earthquake. In terms of how often events like that occur, we do have longer records going back many thousands of years from paleo-tsunami and turbidite data, which suggest pretty variable recurrence intervals, sometimes less than 100, sometimes more than 500 years. But all of that data is from the Aceh area. So we really don't know how long each of those ruptures were, whether they were really extensive like 2004 or whether they could have been shorter. Moving on to the Nias segment, there are a number of different types of ruptures that have occurred here, like tsunami earthquake in 1907. But in terms of the dominant rupture mode, it seems like there were two pretty similar ruptures in 2005 and in 1861. Shown in these maps, basically this is everywhere that there's coral data from the 1861 earthquake, and everywhere that we have data, it's very similar to the amount of uplift that occurred in 2005. There was also a potentially similar event in 1422, but as you can see, we have much less data for that. So there's not much data for that and not much data in the intervening time. So there definitely could have been more earthquakes in between, but we just haven't found any corals of that age. There are also smaller events that occur here, such as in 1843, only affected a couple sites on Nias, tsunami earthquake in 1907, like I mentioned, and other smaller events recently. These seem to be kind of filling in the gaps that are left by these larger events, but the larger events don't happen as frequently as the smaller ones. There's also an interesting observation here that it seems like the interseismic coupling changes at times that are not associated with earthquakes. So each of these lines here is the deformation record from a given coral. And the white lines here are the 1843 and 1861 earthquakes. So when these lines have a bend, that means the rate of deformation changed, but you can see that a lot of these changes happened before or not at the same time as the earthquakes. All right, so now we can move on to the Mentawai segment, which is the one where I've worked the most, and we kind of also have the most data. So the first thing that you can see is there are these rupture cascades, which are within the Mentawai segment. So while we never see one continuous end-to-end rupture, we do have these cascades which combine to rupture the full segment. So let's look at those in a little bit more detail. So we know of the 4 most recent rupture sequences, one in the 14th century, 16th to 17th centuries, 18th to 19th centuries, and finally the one that's been going on in the 21st century. So the first 2 of those are known only from uranium thorium dating. These are historical, and these we have instrumental records. So in each of these cases, there's multiple events. I'll just focus in first on the historical events. So we know that from, again, coral records, we have up to about 1 meter of uplift in 1797. This is focused on the northern Mentawais, and in 1833, more than 2 meters of uplift in the southern Mentawais. Now those are measurements of surface deformation. If we want to know how much the fault slipped, we need to do a model. So this is not a direct observation, but has a lot of assumptions built into it, but we can still get a good approximation of what happened. Important to note though, this is model resolution. Basically all of the areas, because all of our coral data is from the islands, anywhere that is far from the islands, we don't have a good constraint on how much the fault slipped. And in particular, basically all of these bright red areas along the edge in the shallow megathrust in particular, which is responsible for creating the largest tsunamis, we really don't have a good constraint on how much it slipped. So in 1797, this is the amount of slip going up to around 4 meters or so. But if we permit slip to occur all the way to the trench, we get quite a bit more slip. And from the coral data, we can't tell the difference between which of these is the true story. We do know from historical records there was a significant tsunami in 1797 on the coast of Sumatra. So maybe it's more likely that there was significant shallow slip that was needed to produce that tsunami. Similarly, for 1833, the 2 different models with and without shallow slip. And I'll compare here the 2007 earthquakes that occurred in the same area. It's a little bit difficult to see in the color scale, but basically the 1833 earthquake had a greater extent and more slip than occurred in the 2007 earthquake. So there's probably still some more potential slip to occur to equal what happened in 1833. Okay, let's move on to the previous sequence of events. So you can see already here that there are actually 5 earthquakes on this map. This is kind of a unique period in the record where there's a period you can see in this coral. It was growing upward during the first part of its life, but it was uplifted gradually over several events in the second part of its life. So this is indicating that there were multiple uplift events that eventually killed this coral. And if any of you are familiar with the science paper published in 2008, there were only 2 events interpreted at that time, but this was based on a much smaller data set than what we have now. We now have 2 times the data, and based on that, we know that there were at least 5 events as part of this sequence. That began with, there was possibly an event in 1569, but that's a little uncertain. The first event that we're sure about happened in 1597 in the southern Mentawais, followed by one in 1613. That was towards the shallower part. One in 1631, that was towards the deeper part. In 1658, a much larger event in the northern Mentawais. And finally, in 1703, so more similar to the 1833 event in the southern Mentawais. I should say that other interpretations are possible. This is just kind of the minimum number of events that we need to explain the data. Doing our slip inversions, what we can see here, which is very interesting, is that each of these events is kind of dominantly rupturing a different part of the fault. There is overlap between them, but in this next picture here, which is showing contours of slip for each of these events, in particular, the first 3 events mostly ruptured different areas of the fault. And then the final 2 events did overlap with the earlier ruptures, but were much larger. What this is suggesting is that different asperities might be dominating each of these events. So what we come to in looking at this is each of these supercycles, culminations of supercycles, involved a rupture cascade, but each of them evolved uniquely. Finally, let's look at what's going on with these shallow ruptures. There was a shallow rupture in 2010, also known as a tsunami earthquake, but we found evidence that there was a similar but not identical event in 1300s. So this is a coral from South Pagai Island. During the initial part of its life, it was subsiding, or kind of what we normally expect during the interseismic period. But then at some point, it just started growing upward without interacting with the sea level anymore. And what that is suggesting is that in around the year 1314, it subsided suddenly by about 35 centimeters. And at this location, it was later uplifted and died in 1350, which was one of the more typical megathrust events in that cascade. But in 1314, there's evidence of this shallow event, which in comparison to the one that happened in 2010, at this site in 2010, there were only 4 centimeters of subsidence in comparison to 35. So it's perhaps occurred in the same area, but not identical. We did a few models of this event. We don't have a lot of data, obviously, it's just one site, but we determined that in comparison to 2010, the 1314 event would have needed to be significantly deeper on the interface. Still probably would have been known as a tsunami earthquake, but not quite as shallow as the one in 2010. And I'm not going to go into the details here. You can look at the paper if you'd like to know more, but we find evidence by comparing all the coral data that we have for this site over 1,000 years of data. We find evidence that this type of event might be happening about every 1,000 years or so. So this is what we might call a superimposed cycle, where we have this longer recurrence interval of a different type of event that is superimposed on the more frequent cascades on the main part of the Mentawai segment. So in addition, we also noticed some interesting things about the deformation rates over time. These are maps of deformation rates in various time periods. We note that in the late interseismic period, so this is basically right before one of these rupture cascades begins, the patterns are fairly simple with fault parallel subsidence happening. But during the rupture cascades, they are much more complex and variable. So what this is suggesting is that each earthquake is changing which parts of the fault interface are locked or slipping. And to illustrate that in more detail, this is the change in coupling that happened, in this case, associated with the 1797 earthquake. So in blue areas, the coupling decreased, and in red areas, the coupling increased. So to summarize all of this, it seems like what is going on is in the 14th century, we've had at least 2 conventional megathrust ruptures followed by a shallow rupture. Next, in the next sequence, we had about 3 relatively small megathrust ruptures followed by 2 larger events, and we had a change in the coupling pattern after the beginning of the rupture sequence. And similarly, in the next sequence, we had only 2 events, but again, the coupling changed after the 1797 earthquake, the first one in the sequence. And in the 21st century, so far, we've had 4 conventional megathrust ruptures above 7, and we expect that at least 1 more will be needed to fully rupture the Mentawai segment. And we also have the shallow rupture, which is similar but not quite the same as the 1314 rupture. So what all of this is suggesting is that this overlap zone is composed of a zone of small patches of the fault with varying frictional properties. And that is what is causing each of these sequences to evolve uniquely and with slightly different combinations of patches in each earthquake each time. So to sum up, this is what we have learned from the past. In Aceh Andaman area, the last complete rupture probably in the 1400s, and there have been more recent smaller earthquakes. In Nias area, we know there have been complete ruptures in 2005 and 1861, and an assortment of other smaller events. In the Mentawai zone, we know that there's never been, as far as we know, a complete single rupture, but there's about a 200-year recurrence of these cascades of multiple events that do rupture the entire segment. And there are generally less than 40 years between the earthquakes within these cascades. There might be shallow ruptures about every 1,000 years. And south of that, in the Sunda Strait, we don't have any data, so we really don't know what might happen there. So all of this gives us some information about what to expect in the future. In the Aceh Andaman area, it will likely be hundreds of years until the next great earthquake, although we might have smaller partial segment ruptures that could happen sooner than that. In Nias, likely it would be more than 100 years until the next great earthquake, but again, these smaller partial ruptures might continue to fill in the gaps that didn't quite rupture in 2005. In the Mentawai area, we expect at least 1 more great earthquake before the end of the current rupture cascade. And given what we observed in the previous cascades, it's likely before 40 years go by, that is before 2047, but that might not be the last or the largest event in the series. And again, down south in the Sunda Strait, because we don't know anything about the past, we don't really know anything about the future either. So that's why it would be great to get more data in that area. I also want to mention that going beyond Sumatra, being able to have this uniquely detailed record in Sumatra has really illuminated all of these different phenomena, such as persistent rupture segmentation, this mosaic of patches that's producing this supercycle behavior, rupture cascades that can span multiple segments, superimposed cycles, and time-varying interseismic coupling, with or without a seismic trigger. And as it turns out, many of these can, based on observations in Sumatra, we're able to recognize these behaviors in other places. For example, in the Nankai Trough of Japan, persistent and frequent rupture barriers can be identified, and actually in pretty much any fault where there's detailed records of multiple seismic cycles, these features can be recognized. Rupture cascades turn out to be very common, just a couple examples on the Chilean megathrust and on the North Anatolian fault in Turkey. Superimposed cycles, the Tohoku event is another obvious case, and that's probably also typically true for shallow megathrust areas that generate tsunami earthquakes. Interseismic coupling variability, we don't have a very long instrumental record yet, but we expect to see more examples of that from long-term modern geodetic studies. And if you'd like to see more examples of this, Aaron Meltzer and I wrote a review paper that did a worldwide review of earthquake rupture patterns, which has many more examples of this. So in conclusion, our paleoseismic studies have revealed hundreds of years of earthquake history, which allows the recognition of patterns and the anticipation of likely future earthquake behavior on the Sumatran Cinder megathrust. And this example highlights many of the earthquake rupture and recurrence patterns that researchers are discovering and should expect to discover in the future on other major faults around the world. So, terima kasih, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bell. Wow, that's both of you all that were excellent presentations. I even tried to recognize and searching everywhere what the result is, and it's kind of complicated, especially for Sumatra and Java, because as we know, that's the complexity is more than like a, how we can say that the signal is looks like have the significant sign for each segment, right? Like if I'm not mistaken, last year or 2 years ago, that Walter also have a lecture in STMKJ, and he also tried to figure out about Indonesia, especially in Sumatra and Java. It's kind of complicated like that. And for the Hunter telling us about the tomography also, and my brother now in PhD also tell about tomography. And for Bells, I imagine that how we can connect it with the coral and the seismic cycle. It's kind of nice try. I even cannot relate to that. So I'm switching it and read it at the same time. That's a nice presentation. Okay, but maybe before I open for the questions, maybe for the crew, if there is any question, you can chat or raise your hand if you want to talk literally to Dr. Bell or with Hunter. Is it possible for y'all? Is there any questions? Oh, okay. There's one question for Dr. Bell. Excuse me, Mr. Bell. A few months ago, I had Megathrust survey after devastating earthquake on an island. There are local people said there are coral formations so up on offshore after that large earthquake. So what do you think are your initial assessment? For your information, there are new earthquake source found over there which uncharged. So do you want to answer it now or we can complete? Dr. Bell?
Yes, so this is certainly there's plenty of other places in Indonesia where that have corals and where you could expect to be able to apply that method.
Yes.
I'm not sure from the question where exactly in Indonesia this is referring to.
Muhammad Fikri Haikal, so where's the place that you have this microthermal survey after earthquake? Can you tell us?
Excuse me. South of the Sulawesi. There's a small
Oh.
island over there.
Oh, what's the name of the island? Maybe they have specific name for the island?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Near of
This is
Selayar Island. I forget exactly the name. That
Okay.
small island south of the Sulawesi.
Oh, South of Sulawesi. It's more complicated than
yes,
Sorry, I'm
they,
sorry.
even if it's complicated, you can still apply the coral method for sure.
Yeah.
So this is after the Palu earthquake or a different one?
Fikri, Fikri Haikal. Is it earthquake after or before the Palu earthquake?
After Palu earthquake, I remember the name Kalatoa Island. After the Palu earthquake, it's December 2021.
Oh,
Just few
21st
months
okay.
ago.
December. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so it's yes, I think I know the earthquake you're talking about. Yes, it's in the Flores Sea area, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so that would be very interesting. I think it would be a great idea to go for some Indonesian researchers to go and investigate the corals that might have been uplifted in that event, because yes, it could definitely be there. For sure, there are earthquake sources that are uncharted, especially in eastern Indonesia, and any time that some coral reefs could have been uplifted as a result of earthquakes, that is a really important thing to investigate.
Okay, how is it? Muhammad Fikri Haikal? Is it
Excuse me, miss. So do you think it's connected with the earthquake, or it just maybe from the sea level maybe?
It's hard to say for sure without going and seeing what happens. So
apply methods? Yes.
Okay,
if it happens suddenly, I haven't seen the data, so I can't judge without more information. But if it's if there's evidence that corals were suddenly uplifted, that out of like before the earthquake they were totally underwater, and after they were above water, that's probably not to do with the sea level change. It had to be so sudden, it had to be a tectonic effect.
Okay, thank you.
If that answers your question.
Okay. How is it, Muhammad Fikri? Is it okay for the answer, or do you have any objections?
Is it okay, ma'am?
Okay, thank you for questions. Okay, okay, question next for Dr. Bell. In your opinion, what makes the persistent rupture barrier, and how you determine the height of uplift subsidence from the coral?
Yeah, those are great questions.
From me, yes.
So the persistent rupture barriers do need to be connected somehow with either a structural discontinuity in the fault. So for example, if you had in a strike slip fault, for example, if you have a step over in the fault, like there are many step overs along the Great Sumatran Fault, it can be difficult for an earthquake to propagate through that. And there could be analogous discontinuities in a subduction setting as well. So that is one option for how to create a barrier to rupture. Another one would be if the frictional properties on that part of the fault are not conducive to allowing a rupture to propagate. So there are two basic types of rheology, which we call velocity strengthening and velocity weakening. If it's velocity weakening, if the fault is moving a lot, it has a high velocity, then it becomes weaker, and that allows the earthquake to propagate farther. Whereas if you have a different kind of material, which is velocity strengthening, if it's moving a lot, it actually becomes harder, and that causes the earthquake to stop. So if you have a velocity strengthening material, that could be another option for creating a persistent rupture barrier. For the second question, how do you determine the height of uplift and subsidence from the coral? So we can, if the coral did not completely die, like for example, the example that I showed for 1797, 1833 earthquakes, we can actually directly measure this was the height of the coral before the earthquake, and this was the height of the coral after the earthquake in the next year that it grew. So we can directly measure the difference, which gives us the uplift. Now, if the coral totally died, then we only have a minimum estimate. We know it was uplifted enough to raise it completely out of the water, but it could be a lot more. So in those cases, we have to make some other arguments, for example, projecting the rate of subsidence over time to estimate what it was immediately after, to estimate the relative sea level immediately after the earthquake. So there are some ways that we can do it in that case. I should say that if it's immediately after the earthquake, if you just go out the morning after the earthquake, even if the coral was completely lifted out of the water, you can now see what the current sea level is. You can measure that directly and compare that to, or you can measure corals that are still alive now and compare it to the coral that is dead. And then you can get the uplift in that way. Same thing for subsidence, although it's a little bit more, it's a little bit trickier because the coral doesn't die if it's submerged. It just changes its growth pattern. It continues growing upward instead of being kind of limited by the sea level.
Okay, thank you, Terrell. And again, Terrell, can you tell us more about the emerged coral? Can it determine seismic recurrence interval? And also maybe, how can I say, the continuous equations, like as we know, Indonesian data about the coral is not that completely, how I can say, completely good, because as we know, the year after the 2004 earthquake, it just nice, but before that, sometimes a lot of data missing, as we know, right? And is it possible to get accurate probability measure for this method, especially for coral? And maybe we can determine the seismic cycle phenomena if the data is not that good to get it.
I don't think I quite understood everything that you asked. Can you repeat again? Sorry.
Okay. About the missing data, some missing data or no data, is it possible to get the accurate probability measurement? Because as we know, if the data is not that much, the accuracy it's much more smaller than we have a lot of data, right?
Right. Okay. Now I understand. Yes. So of course.
Minimum how many years for the relatively good results for this method for your study case?
So in the best cases for Sumatra, we do have coral data that covers about 700 years, which is, and it's four seismic cycles. So I mean, it's true that is not enough to do some kind of rigorous statistical analysis of recurrence interval. To really do statistics, you need 20 or more events typically. And it's probably impossible to get that from coral data, unfortunately. But I think we have enough data that we can recognize patterns, even though we can't rigorously test them statistically, and it gives us a reasonable idea of what to expect in the future. And in that case, for the Mentawai case, it does seem like the approximately 200-year recurrence of the cascades is consistent with the data that we have. But of course, in the short term, we are inside a cascade, so we can expect more earthquakes to happen at any time. It's very likely that it could happen any time. for example, for NIAS, we really have only 2 events, so we can't really define a recurrence interval, but you know, we do the best that we can with that, in that it's quite unlikely that in order to build up enough energy to produce the next event, it would probably need to be a significant amount of time before we get something else like 2005. But definitely we could have something, smaller events, like maybe something similar to the 1907 tsunami earthquake, or in 2010 there was a smaller earthquake in that area. And when I say small, they're still, you know, above magnitude 7. So there's something something to be concerned about.
Yes.
So the short answer, I guess, is yes, we will probably never have perfect information. There are some, but corals are some of the best that we have in terms of the details, and there are other techniques that can be used to go farther into the past, like for example, paleo-tsunami deposits and turbidite deposits. So definitely we could use more of those kinds of observations to get that. They're not going to give the kind of precision that we get with corals. We won't be able to say, oh, this was the exact year that the earthquake happened, because we don't have those annual bands in the coral to count. But it can get a better estimate of the long-term average recurrence interval of those types of events.
Okay, sorry. Nandesi, we also asked us about the determine seismic recurrence interval, maybe also connected with that, right? The data, also the study case or the event. Okay, this is someone asked for the raise hand. Mr. Rudianto, you want to ask? You can turn on your, yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Question for whom?
I would like to ask for Mr. Hunter Martin.
Okay, Mr. Hunter Martin.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you speak louder, please?
Beside on your explanation regarding the seismicity in Sumatra and Java trend, especially for the historical of large magnitude earthquake along the Java Sumatra trends, we can find that the seismic gaps around the Sunda Strait, or the short-term most part of Sumatra Island. So what do you think about this, and for your opinion, what the causes to happen it? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hunter, please answer the questions.
Sure. So if I understand the question right, you're asking about the Sunda Strait, about the deep seismicity there. Is that correct?
Seismicity gaps.
Seismicity gap, maybe.
In
Okay.
your presentation. The large
So-
earthquake, historical large earthquake.
Yeah, so at that point, I guess, you know, you're transitioning from the Sumatra to Java boundary. So the boundary at that point is becoming much more oblique. So at Sumatra, the convergence angle is very oblique. And that's in part what's causing the lessening of deep events. So the Sunda Strait would be essentially kind of that transition zone where you're transitioning from deeper events at Java to less deep events along Sumatra. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
How is it, Rudianto? Is it clear, or do you want to object or explanation about something? Sorry, you turn on the speaker.
So
Yes.
thank you for your explanation. I think it's enough. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. So, the other questions, Mr. Puji from Mr. Puji. Yes, please turn on your microphone.
Yeah, thank you, Ayu.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Hunter and Bell, for the nice and great presentation. I have a question for Hunter. As you mentioned before, that from tomographic imaging, we can see a slab hole or tearing of slab in some area, especially in East Java. And my question is, what is the mechanism of the formation of slab hole, and what is the impact? Thank you.
So you're asking what is the mechanism for causing the holes in the slab, is that correct?
Yes, the mechanism of the formation of slab hole.
So the hole in the slab beneath Java, I believe, was interpreted to be related to the buoyancy of the subducting lithosphere, if I'm correct. I believe that was the mechanism for that particular hole.
Okay, maybe one more question. And what is the impact for the seismicity in the area? And is there a correlation with the presence of thick sediment in we know in East Java there is a Kendeng Basin? What's your opinion about that?
So you're asking what is the correlation between thick sediment and the hole in the slab? I'm not 100% familiar on the correlation between them, to be honest. I would have to look into that a little more and dive into that a little deeper. I'm not actually 100% certain.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Hunter.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Scientists also need a lot of patience, so we can check it
Yes.
later. That's possible as well. Wow, this is nice discussion. So how is it else? Anything? Questions? Anyone? Anyone?
I have a question, Walter Mooney.
Okay, sure. Sorry, yes, sir.
So your talk was very impressive and informative. What I'd like to know is how many years of work does this represent? How many years and how many people for this wonderful result?
You're asking me?
You're asking Little Bell or Hunter? Which one?
Or to Bell. Bell.
Okay, Bill.
Yes. So this work was dominantly done by one research group, Carrie C. being the professor advising all of the grad students who worked on this project. And that began in the early 1990s. So it was 20 to 25 years of work, but a relatively small number of people, in that it was 5 graduate students, including myself, who worked on it in sequence over the years. So really, in comparison to work that's been done on the San Andreas Fault, for example, which has been over much longer periods of time and with much higher numbers of people, it's truly phenomenal how much data and the detail of the data that we've been able to get for Sumatra.
Oh, sorry, what's that? Fikri, Haikal, please turn off your, okay. Continue with Bell, sorry. It's just technical.
Thank you. Thank you. That's impressive. As you said, 25 years and mostly the effort of 5 people in sequence with a lot of helpers and field assistants and so on. Yeah. So this cannot be replicated quickly in Java. It will require a concerted effort to achieve the goal.
Not easily, yes. And also, of course, Java does not have accretionary wedge islands, which is another main challenge there. But certainly, I think it should be possible to find corals along the coastline of Java, which might still have some signal. It would not be as large as if they were located over the seismogenic parts of the fault, but you might still be able to pick up some signal even along the coast.
Right.
And definitely, I think it could be replicated in other parts of Indonesia that have all kinds of faults and all kinds of orientations.
Sure. How is it,
Thank
Volker?
you.
Is it good? Okay, the right hand on the one is Mr. Jamroni.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Ayu.
Yes.
Yeah. I have one question to Dr. Bell. My question is, why should we have to divide three segments, Andaman, Nias, and Mentawai segment? What the advantage and what is important to divide these three segments? Because in my opinion, the large earthquake, for example, in Aceh earthquake, it can influence the war area of Andaman, Mentawai, and Nias. Okay, that's my question.
Yes, great
Now, is it
question.
clear? Okay.
Yes,
Yes, please.
I think I understand. So yes, of course, any large earthquake on any of the segments does affect the others, and we see that, of course, after the 2004 event we had following in 2005 and 2007 events that were kind of triggered by that one, or at least hastened by that one. But what's important about the segment boundaries is that is placing a limit on the maximum length of the rupture that you can have at a time. So based on the history of earthquakes that we've documented, we don't expect to see a rupture that goes all the way from one end of Sumatra to the other, for example. So they would be, we expect future events to be confined within the segments that we observed. Does that answer your question?
How is it, Mr. Jamroni? Is it okay?
Yes, it is that you mean the superimpose from the each segment.
I didn't quite catch that. Can you say again?
I mean because of each segment, the deposit of the large earthquake can influence the impose or superimpose for any other segment. I mean.
Yes, I think certainly we see evidence that an earthquake on any one segment can influence earthquakes that happened on the others. But even so, we don't see earthquakes rupturing through the segment boundaries. So they are placing a limit on the maximum size of earthquakes that can occur.
Okay, I think there's enough, Mr. Yori. And for the two questions, I'm sorry to say that our time is limited.
Thank you.
Because we have another course after this. So thank you for all your nice presentation, Hunter and Ralph. I hope that all of your knowledge will get it to me and we can share it together. And for the participant, thank you for attending these sessions. If you have additional questions for the presenter, maybe you can ask the future for the committee, or you can ask by email. You can search in Google and check their email, something like that. Okay, thank you very much for today. And wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to MC.
Yeah, thank you very much. But Ayu, it's a very attractive and interesting discussion and material. And of course, thank you very much for Dr. Bella Philosophian. And yeah, I actually thank you very much for Hunter Martin as well for your awesome material. For the second session, what do you want to ask something? So your hand.
Yes, that's my hand is up still. Let's see, lower hand. Okay. Thank you.
So maybe we are going to the next session, or maybe we can take a break for a while. So
I think we can just finish because the only 2 more talks.
Oh yes. So we are going to the next session. So maybe please Dr. Watchaburi to lead for the second session. So
Thank you so much. So the second session is a very special session. We have 2 members of the staff of BMKG that are going to lecture. Both of them are very talented young scientists. Aprila Noor Vita, she's a graduate of STMKG, the famous college that many of you graduated, and now she's a master's student at ITB Bandung, as you know. So she has a lot of experience in seismology and has worked on focal mechanisms, microzonation, site response, seismic gaps, a very talented young researcher at BMKG. So it's my pleasure to welcome her to give her talk on ambient noise seismology. So Aprila, the time is yours.
Okay, do you hear my voice clear, Manny?
You're a little bit faint. Maybe you can put the microphone a little bit closer, or as you like.
Is that good?
Now it's better. Now we hear you better.
Okay.
That's good.
Selamat pagi. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Manny. Let me share my screen. Is my screen seen from there?
We see it. Now you should make it full screen.
Full screen, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Can we start now?
We can start now.
Okay. Today I will present about the introduction of seismic ambient noise for Earth imaging. Maybe about some basics concept of ambient noise itself and a little bit data processing. Hope you will, all of you will try to process the ambient noise with your own data and yourself, and some application of ambient noise in Java, Sumatra, and other places to obtain information of subsurface structure related to earthquake hazard.
Can somebody mute all the mic, because we hear some music in the background. Maybe we can mute everyone.
I think because
maybe it's coming from you.
Yes, because I should work from a cafe near here with the stable internet connection. Does it disturb so much? Does it disturb?
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. Okay. I will next. Let's start with a question. If you see this kind of seismogram, what do you see in the first time in this seismogram? I think all of us will focusing in the earthquake signal like P wave, S wave, and even Coda wave. And what about the rest of the signal that even dominated the whole seismogram? Sometimes we call it noise. Does this noise contain some information to that give us a beneficial information about subsurface information? And actually, we can use this noise for Earth imaging. The common approach of the Earth imaging is obtain information about the Earth from observable interaction of a wave field during propagation from source to a set of receiver. Based on its source, the Earth imaging is divided into body wave tomography that using local or seismic earthquake, and the second is surface wave tomography that we use noise from the surface wave from noise. So where does this noise come from? Actually, the noise that recorded from seismometer can excite from everything, like human activity or natural phenomenon. The human activity is like drilling or cars train, where the natural phenomenon is like ocean wave, storm, and volcanic activity. What the difference about human activity noise and natural phenomenon is human activity have a high frequency noise, more than 1 up to 10 hertz, and that it will be easily attenuated in distance and depth. And human activity noise is have a diurnal variation, tend to higher in daytime and lower at night, while the natural phenomenon usually have a low frequency and dominated with the ocean wave, or sometimes we call it microseism. The noise characteristic at a certain place or certain area can be seen using PSD-PDF diagram of the seismic record. You can see here that the diurnal cultural noise have a period, shorter period or higher frequency, while the microseism have a frequency around 1 up to maybe 15 seconds, and the microseism itself is there are two types. There are secondary microseism and primary microseism. The secondary microseism is triggered by wave and seafloor interaction, while the primary microseism generated by wave interaction. The microseism is the ambient noise spectrum of the Earth, dominated by broad, and it has dominant peaks near 7 and 14 seconds, and principally it comes from seismic surface waves. This excitation of microseism is observed globally, and the microseism peak are largely unaffected by noise from human activity. And this is the example of generation of the surface wave, the interaction of atmosphere and seawater generated the waves and motion of the molecule. The motion will generate the oscillating pressure on the sand floor and then generated ground roll. This ground roll is known as surface wave, low or relief wave. And the direction of the surface wave is propagated through the land, and this wave can propagate hundreds to thousands of kilometers within a stable continent interior. And the main point here is because the surface wave not generated from earthquake, it is not single source, but distribution of source, and it can vary with time. And the basic principle of seismic noise for imaging is start from seismic interferometry. The seismic interferometry is the extraction of green function between two sensors, and by cross correlation from response in receiver 1 and receiver 2, we have new response called green function that represent the impulse response of the Earth between the receiver 1 and receiver 2. For more clear explanation, I think we can see in this picture. Let's say we have two receivers in R1 and R2 surrounded by source. The source can be explosion, or in this case is noise. And by seismic interferometry, we turn one receiver into virtual source, and by process cross-correlation and stacking from these two receiver, we can obtain subsurface information. And the goals of ambient noise for Earth imaging is to get higher resolution of subsurface imaging for better understanding tectonic and interior dynamic of Earth, especially in the shallow depth. This is the comparison of body wave tomography and the ambient noise tomography. The body wave tomography, the data depend on the earthquake occurrence. So it means more earthquake, more data, the earthquake, no data. But the ambient noise tomography, the source itself is continuous. So we can do the ambient noise tomography without the earthquake occurrence. And in the body wave tomography, the rapid, we cannot control the location of the source. And the density of rapid also affected by the number of earthquake that happen in this area. But in this tomography ambient noise, we can control the station density to get a higher resolution within the area we want to imaging. And when let's say this station is inland of Java Island, if we using body wave tomography, we only able to extract data in the area between Java Trench and Java Island. While when we use ambient noise tomography, we can get subsurface imaging within the Java Island itself. And the application of ambient noise tomography is improving coverage in region with limited earthquake. And we can do local, continental, global scale tomography without dependent on the earthquake occurrence. And ambient noise is also can be an alternative to expensive active source imaging and monitoring in case of seismic exploration. And ambient noise also can be used for long-term monitoring along active fault zones, volcanoes, and geothermal reservoirs. And this is the example of ambient noise application in East Java tomography in regional scale. We can see the contrast velocity between south of Java and northern part of Java. And we talk this detail later. And this is the local scale of tomography in Jakarta Basin by Saigin 2015. They are successfully imaging the depth of the sediment beneath the Jakarta. And ambient noise also can be applied to detection of hidden fault in the urban area, like the case of in Guangzhou town by Zheng et al. 2021, and second with at 2010 by using ambient noise reveal the existence of two magma chamber beneath the Toba Lake in northern Sumatra. What about the processing? The processing is we follow Benson et al. 2007 with a guidance for processing data ambient noise. It mainly divided into 4 phases. The phase 1 is have a purpose to attempting to remove earthquake signal and instrument irregularities that tend to obscure ambient noise. If we in the earthquake processing, we usually remove the noise to get more clearer earthquake signal. But in this noise processing, we try to remove earthquake to accentuate ambient noise. And the phase 2, the next phase is we compute cross correlation and stack correlation to desired number of days. This is the example of a pairs of cross correlation between two stations. We can see the causal part and a causal part. We see that the longer the data, to the 2 years data is give us better green function than 1 month data. And after we have the green function or the Rayleigh wave, we have to extract the dispersion curve. The dispersion curve is extracted using frequency time analysis with multi-filtering technique. Because we know that dispersive signal is the surface wave is a dispersive signal, so different package arrive at different times and depending on the frequency. So frequency time analysis with multi-filtering technique is used to obtain group velocity dispersion curve. This is the dispersion curve between two station pair. And this dispersion curve is that used as the input for ambient noise tomography. The tomography inversion we obtain after dispersion curve extraction. We do the tomographic inversion to obtain group or phase velocity map. The inversion can be conducted in two ways. There are optimization based and ensemble of models. The differences about this method is the optimization based is using fixed parameter, and the ensemble of model is using adaptive parameter. The ensemble model, when we use optimization base, we try to obtain most optimum model with smaller misfit, while the ensemble model, we approach the model with statistical approach to get the best model for our data. The ensemble model the subjectivity of ensemble model is less than optimization based, but we need to perform it in high computing, like LPC or I think a high performance computer like this. And this is the ambient noise application in sedimentary basin in Banyumas, Central Java by Setiawan. Setiawan can extract the group phase velocity of Rayleigh wave, and there are the existence of low velocity group of Rayleigh in Majenang Low and Citandui Low up to period 5 seconds. And when we inverse to depth inverse, we can see the low velocity zone is spread from 0.5 kilometers up to 2 kilometers. And the vertical cross section shows us that the Majenang Low has more thicker sediment than the Citandui Low. And this is the upper crustal shear wave velocity structure beneath Western Java by Rosalia 2020. This is the there are like in East Java, there are contrast velocity between southern part of West Java and between northern part of Java, and there are circular pattern that represent a basin beneath Garut and Bandung and surround near Jakarta. The Western Java is This is the vertical cross-section of this image. We can see here that Bandung and Garut located in a sedimentary basin that have a sediment thickness about maybe up to 7 and 10 kilometers. This Western Java includes several large population centers, including the world largest urban agglomeration around Jakarta, and as well as the major city of Bandung and Garut. We know that all of which located in sedimentary basin. No major earthquake struck this location since 20th century, but there are some historical earthquake here in Western Java that cause widespread destruction. One of them is, I think, 7.5 magnitude near Jakarta. If this earthquake recur today, it will cause heavy damage in this urban population center, not only of high population density, but also due to basin resonance and amplification of seismic wave. And this is the upper crustal in East Java by Marta 2007. The Marta have revealed the existence of Sidoarjo volcano and very thick sediment beneath the Madura Strait. This study described here was undertaken in order to constrain the shallow crustal structure that might influence the propagation of seismic waves. So in the future, better forecasts can be made of ground motion due to significant earthquake. And this is my current research, not in Java actually, but in West Halmahera, Maluku, and we conduct the seismic ambient tomography under the area of swarm in 2016 that long lasts for 2 years, and we obtain a widespread low velocity anomaly in the shallow depth up to 2 kilometer depth. We still interpreting what causes this low velocity anomaly, whether it comes from the existence of geothermal fluid or magmatic movement. And this is a vertical cross-section of beneath Jailolo. We can see there are two main low velocity anomaly in the northern part and the southern part of Jailolo volcano. And the future research prospect using ANT with the existence of BMKG network is maybe we can use the regional ambient noise tomography in Java using log wave. The previous research is using relief wave, and we can try to using log wave. The importance of using log wave tomography is to observe the existence of anisotropy in the crust, and then we can do the fault imaging in Baribis area. In Baribis area, I think in this area, because the existence of seismic station is quite dense, and it will be great for us to study the fault imaging in this area, and maybe in Sumatra we can do the upper crustal imaging along Sumatra fault zone, or the ambient noise to imaging between Nias Island, Mentawa Island, and the Sumatra Main Island. And for East Indonesia, we can try to imagine the backup thrust Flores by by using the station distribution in Java, Bali, and Nusa Tenggara to south of Sulawesi. And if you're interested with ambient noise processing, you can try to. There are a lot of processing tools. You can find it on the internet, but there are two of most famous of these processing tools. There are NoisePy and MS Noise Tomo by Thomas Lecoq. And I think it's all. And thank you for your time. If you have any question, you can directly send me email to this email address. Thank you, Manny.
Okay, thank you very much. A very good presentation with a lot of information. And we do have some time for questions. I will see if I can see any raised hands, or I'll look at the chat room also. So ambient noise tomography was giving you the shear wave velocity structure, right?
Yes.
So what about the P wave? How to measure P wave? Because if you have P wave, then you can do VPVS.
Yes. Because so far the ambient noise is more sensitive to the S wave velocity, so it'd be better for us to extract the S wave only, not the P. If we want to use the P wave, we can use the body wave tomography. Actually, the P wave we can calculate the P wave too by mathematical formulation, but so far the S wave is most
Right,
better.
of course. Yeah, can you show us again what period waves you're looking at? You're looking at Rayleigh waves, and what period? 1 second to which period?
1 up to 10 maybe 1 up to 10 seconds, or depend on the noise characteristic of at the certain region. For the example, this is the noise is have a period from 1 up to 10 seconds. So it's better to use within that period.
That's where you get the good signal.
Yes.
Because if you go to longer than 10-second period, then you can go deeper.
Yes, we can go, because the penetration of the surface wave depend on the period. Yes,
right.
we can go into deeper, but you must consider it about the surface wave that coming from the SAIS or the seismic the hum noise. That noise comes from the hum.
The seismic hum, right?
Yes. Actually, from the other research, we can obtain up to 20 or 30 kilometer depths. So maybe in the period at 30 second period.
So can we look at one of your results, the cross-section, one of your cross-sections of the sedimentary basin? I'll go back.
This one?
Yeah, this one. Yeah, this is good. And maybe you can go, I'll make it full screen so I can see it. Just a minute. Okay, so my question for you is very simple. Is this result correct?
Yes. If we do the ambient noise data, we do the checkerboard resolution test. So to verification that our result is correct or not, we comparing to geological map, and we do the checkerboard test. That means if we do the checkerboard test, the checkerboard will recover in the area that have a good coverage data.
Okay.
And we conduct the sensitivity test. Let's say the period of 4 seconds have the sensitivity of the certain depth and etc. So before we do the interpretation, we should make sure that our imaging is verified by checkerboard test and sensitivity test.
Right. Okay. I do understand it, and you are doing the right thing. So I think this is very good. The dashed line, the dashed line is the basement, the bottom of the sedimentary basin.
Yes.
So what about the borehole? Compare with the borehole, which gives you the truth.
Maybe if we have a borehole data, it's good to comparing the borehole to the imaging result. But we still sometimes in the certain area we have no borehole or bore anything related data to comparing. So so far we only comparing to maybe outcrop rock or geological map.
Okay, so maybe you can talk to someone and find out the borehole data, because certainly there is borehole data, but it has to be researched very carefully. So there's a question in the chat box from Marcelli, Justia, Ms. Vita, how many data is used in your research? I think maybe the question is, how many seismic stations are you using in your research?
Okay, I will try to. In my research, I use about 35 seismic station data that installed by GFZ and PMKG in the late of 2017. I am the seismic data is, and the seismic station is, the distribution of seismic data is around the Jailolo and some of them in Ternate Island. We have data for about a year data.
Okay.
A year data, and but sometimes there is a gap between the data, so we cannot use the data for ambient noise tomography. Let's say we only have a good data for 8 months and 7 months. This is.
But in your image for 0.4, you have the bright red area.
Yeah.
And this cannot be magma. If it's magma, the heat flow at the surface would be the highest heat flow on the Earth.
Yeah.
This can only be some other feature like steam or something like that.
Yeah.
You cannot have magma 400 meters below the surface of the Earth.
Yeah. Yes, because I think so, because the Jailol area is also geothermal field, so it may be respect to the, as you said, steam or another
or
water,
hot water or
yeah,
something.
hot water. Yeah, spring water.
Oh, okay, thank you. By the way, what's the scale? It looks like this study area is about 5 kilometers by 10 kilometers, something very local.
Yeah, it is quite local for, because it's only around the Jailolo area, and
yeah,
Jailolo, it may be one quite local for this, not regional.
Very good. Well, you're doing interesting work. I'm looking if anyone has the hand raise or any question. Please put your question in chat box if you would like to get more information. If you want to ask a question. So what do you think about the ambient noise technique? Do you feel the technique is reliable, or there are too many uncertainties in the processing of the data?
I think the ambient noise technique is reliable, especially for the shallow depth, because the resolution of body wave tomography is not good. I think it's not that good in the shallow depth. So we can combine the ambient noise tomography for imaging in the shallow, and the deeper part we can use the body wave tomography. Actually, now we have a technique that combine the surface wave and body wave. We call adjoint tomography. So it will give us a good resolution in both that part and the shallow part.
I see. Yeah.
But I think the ambient noise tomography is we still have to try to find the best frequency, the best period, the best frequency we should use to give us the best correlation or the empirical green function, because it depends on the area, it depends on the source itself, depends on the condition of the environment in this we want to image using ambient noise.
And what is the good station spacing for these kind of studies, local basin studies? How far apart should the stations be located?
Yes, the ambient noise actually cannot give us a good resolution if the station is too close.
Right.
Too close.
Right.
Yes. Maybe or two basin we have to settle our station in range for up to 15 kilometers, not more than 20 kilometers, maybe 10 or 12, like this.
Walter, may I ask in bahasa?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, please. Silakan Pak.
Oke, Mbak, ini menarik sekali yang di Jailolo. Ini kalau nggak salah gempa swarm ya?
Iya, yang swarm Pak. Yes.
Nah, di Sulawesi ada juga 2 kali gempa swarm tahun 2018 sama 2020 di Kabupaten Mamasa, Sulawesi Selatan. Sampai saat ini kami agak kesulitan mencari penyebab swarm itu karena siapa. Apakah teknik ini bisa digunakan untuk menemukan karena patahan apa atau karena ada hidrotermal atau gimana? Teknik ini bisa digunakan dan bisa menemukan kira-kira penyebab dari 2 kejadian gempa swarm di Mamasa itu bisa digunakan, Mbak. Makasih.
Ya, Pak. Terima kasih Pak pertanyaannya. Should I answer in bahasa or in English, Mani?
In English.
You can answer in bahasa.
Oh ya, iya Pak. Saya jawab di bahasa aja Pak ya. Sejauh yang pernah dilakukan sebelumnya bisa Pak, asalkan kita punya stasiun coverage yang cukup di sekitar gempa Mamasa itu. Jadi dengan ambient noise itu kita bisa lihat apakah memang ada pergerakan magma ataupun fluida ataupun geothermal, ataukah memang ada fault di sekitar situ. Nah, mungkin kalau di Mamasa ini kita harus melakukan yang versi lokal, maksudnya local scale, dan itu butuh stasiun yang cukup di sekitar wilayah itu dengan jarak yang tidak terlalu jauh dan dengan pengukuran secara kontinu dalam waktu yang cukup cukup misal 4 bulan, mungkin 4 bulan atau 5 bulan. Soalnya waktu itu kita juga pernah mencoba untuk melakukan fault mapping gitu di Jakarta, dan kita cuma dapat, karena stasiunnya kurang rapat sama waktu pengukurannya itu tidak lama, jadi istilahnya tidak berhasil gitu. Jadi kalau Bapak punya data dengan existing maupun dengan seismogram tambahan, kita bisa lakukan untuk mengetahui penyebab SWAM tersebut. Begitu, Pak.
Ya, Mbak, makasih, Mbak.
Ya, Pak.
Di kami itu yang dekat Mamasa memang agak sedikit stasiunnya. Tapi kalau pengukuran dari TDS pernah dilakukan, sama yang data kemarin itu dari Seskompi aja, hasil Seskompi. Itu bisa ya, Mbak, masih?
Kalau TDS-nya, kalau boleh tahu ada berapa, Pak?
Satu.
Oh, satu. Itu karena kan kita harus pakai data di waktu yang sama gitu, Pak, untuk cross korelasinya gitu. Jadi kalau mungkin bisa dicoba dulu pakai yang dari Seskompi itu, apakah nanti sebarannya cukup untuk mendapatkan resolusi yang kita inginkan, seperti itu, Pak. Kalau memang mau dicari, ya kita bisa install beberapa stasiun tambahan buat di daerah tersebut.
Ya, Mbak, baik, Mbak, makasih ya.
Ya, terima kasih, Pak. Sama-sama.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, Aprila. You did a great job and you have good results. And I can see you're going to write a wonderful master's degree at IT Bandung.
Yes, thank you.
Look forward to seeing your result.
Okay, thank you. This will be preparation into frontier, but we don't know where will we submit it.
Oh, you want to know where to submit your result?
Yes.
Yeah, we can discuss by email. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So the final talk will be given now, and I want to congratulate Aprila Puspita for her patience. It's difficult to be the last speaker because you have to wait 3 days before you can finally be free and give your talk. So Aprila has lots of experience in seismology. She's worked on earthquake relocations in East Java. She's interested in machine learning and has done a lot of work on tsunami information. So we know that she's a very dedicated and hardworking researcher at the BMKG, and we are pleased that you have been so patiently waiting to give your talk. The floor is yours. Please welcome and thank you for your talk.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator, Dr. Walter Moni. My voice is here. Okay. Okay, let me share screen. You can see here.
It looks very good, very nice.
Okay.
Very clear.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Walter Moni, as a moderator. And this an occasion I will to share about my research topic before is application using a SAR image to identify the earthquake deformation using a DINSAR or differential interferometry synthetic aperture radar with methods. And let me introduce myself. My name is Aprilia Puspita from the Earthquake Information Subdivision. And as we know before, is several time ago, there was a significant earthquake in the Pasaman area here. This is magnitude 6.2 happened in 25 February 2022. And the earthquake have a high impact. This has destructive 10 until 100 building and cause victim. And the earthquake also caused a landslide in several points here. So listen from the event. Maybe we need very important to be able to provide information about the deformation area, that maybe we can mapping the area that's experiencing surface deformation or the have a high potential happening deformation is as a mitigation effort, and we can be identify seismogenic fault here. And this is outlet my presentation. And the first is I want to introduce about the SAR. SAR is synthetic aperture radar. That's imaging system that using microwave that is capable to cloud penetration. And the SAR sensor is transmit pulse from the electronic wave along the line of sight and collect them and backscattering from the target surface. And the SARs that we using in this research, we using a Sentinel-1 image. This contain amplitude image and the pulsar image. The amplitude image is an image that have high resolution here, and the pulsar image is image the singular complex image or the they have content information about the range and the geometrical orbit based target and the satellite. And amplitude image or backscatter image, we can call it GRD image. We can do a GRD image to the monitoring object change, and the pulsar image or SLC image or single complex image. We can process with INSAR or DINSAR method to output the topography map or ground deformation. And in the radar satellite is installation many kind of band. For example, if for the target of the SAR target, we can using a C band or the L band or the Q band. Is depending of the target that we wanted. And if you, for example, maybe with a medium resolution, we can using a C band. For example, like a Sentinel image with a L band, maybe a allospatial image, and the high resolution. We can use using P band. Yes, P band. This we can using a THRSDAY, like a THRSDAY. This is a SAR acquisition model that we can use on the Sentinel data. The Sentinel data include 5 kind of the acquisition model. In the one is interferometric wide swath model or IW mode is usually is using for the to the study of the line. If we want to using the extra wide swath mode or the IW's mode or strip map, it's usually using for the ocean study. And this is the area covered by the interferometric wide mode by Sentinel-1. The area is about 250 kilometers here. And I want to see the, for example, of the SLC image or the pulsar image with a GRD image. We can see the single complex image is the data that have a georeferencing here is divided into 3 subplots here, and every subplot is divided into 9 bursts. And we can choose, we can setting the area. We not must be process all the skin of the satellite data, but we can choose where the area of interest, where we can choosing where the subplot and where the boost that we will be running. This is an example of the GRD image. They have a high resolution, and this is usually have information about the amplitude and the backscattering of the wave of the radar. This is a DINSAR method. Is a development of the INSAR that using a principle with using interferometric principle by measuring the different phase between arriving signal from the same object and obtained through the acquisition at the different time and position by a satellite. As we know here, the function of the ground deformation as the output of DINSAR method is a phase change, and we must be to remove the topographic error phase here, and we must be to remove phase delay at atmosphere, and the residual phase and the disturbance phase. And the output of the ground deformation can be have a negative value that's indicating the area happening subsidence, and the positive value, this is indicating the area happening uplift. But we know the result of the DINSAR is still on the phase units on P radian, and so we must need to convert with an unwrapping process to get the displacement units, and with this formula here. Okay, SAR data that will be processed is on the training is a sentinel image data with a band that we using as with a C band with a wavelength is about 5.4 centimeter single look complex chip, and the spatial resolution is about 20 meters, and the data can be downloaded in the ASF Alaska here, and we will process with open source software using a SNAP or Sentinel Application Platform version 7. This is an interface of the SNAP tool here to the processing DINSAR process. We can process direct process using graph builder, or we can do a process if we get a mistake or the failure process. Maybe we can process it with a step one by one step. And this is for example of the satellite data that we're using to the DINSAR process. This is minimum we need two of Sentinel data. The first acquisition we can call a master image, and the second acquisition we can say is slave image. And this is metadata of the output of the satellite data that maybe we will concern in the band. And I want to show you how to processing with a graph builder. This is a flowchart of the processing of the DINSAR. First is input of the satellite data is the master image and the slave image, and we do a top-SAR split, and we will to apply the orbit, and we continue to co-register image with a Baguio coding, and we will make a interferogram formation here. We continue to do top-SAR the bush, and we next DINSAR processing with a topopath removal, and continue to Goldstein phase filtering, and the last one is the terrain correction, and this is the output. And all of the process is unwrapping puzzle. So maybe if we want to have displacement unit, you must be to unwrapping the puzzle. Okay, maybe if you failure are using a graph builder, maybe you can process it one by one. Maybe the first is you can do operator radar, Sentinel-1 tops. Here, this is Sentinel S1 top split here. Now, this is this is a processing parameter that we use. You can choose where the area of interest in the IW1 or IW is up to you. This is not running all of the skin, but it's needed a high performer RAM of your computer. So we need to divide it to process every skin of every software. This is the burst 1 until 9 is you can setting dependent of your interest area, and you can run. This is a comment of the, you can apply orbit here. You can checklist, you can run. This is a co-register process using a backhill coding. You can add the digital elevation model that you can do. This is can SRTM or SRTM 3 seconds or 1 second is up to you depending of your area. And I want to show you the output of the backhill coding. This is only intensity of the master image and the slave image. We can see still on the grayscale. And the next step is the interferogram formation here. Now, I want to show you the output, the interferogram formation. This is a point of pass. This is, we can see the fringe or interferogram that's performed by a pair of the master orbs and slave image. Maybe this is not really clear. And it is in next step. And this is a DINSAR process with using interferometric product, topographic phase removal, and don't forget to put your digital elevation model here. And the output of the DINSAR process, we have 3 outputs. This is a topographic passband and the elevation passband and the output authorification. You can checklist what your target one. This is the result of the DINSAR process in the picture number 6. Here we can see here have a little differences. The fringe that made by a DINSAR process is more clearly here. This is a next step is we do a filtering with a Goldstein filter. We can, maybe you can default the parameter, and this is the output of the Goldstein filtering. We can see the interferogram is more clearly here. And the last one is we do a terrain correction with a geometric terrain correction, and you can choose the source band that you want to do and run. This is the output. I think the output of the terrain correction and the result of the Goldstein path is not really different. It has the same, but the differences in the orbital satellite that we know the orbital of satellite is not direction is not perpendicular, but is from angles, tilt angles. So we need to correct it with a terrain correction. This is a graphic builder with to the unwrapped processing. This is input from the Goldstein filtering. We will do a SnapHu export. SnapHu export, we're using SnapHu software, and we will running with a command prompt. And if the process is finished, maybe the process need 2 until 1 week to unwrap the process. And we continue to SnapHu import, do a topopath displacement, terrain correction, and the output here. Then the output of the snap is we can export to many formats. For example, it's in the format from the Google Earth, KMZ. We can see here in the interferogram that formed in the area of surrounding the earthquake, Pasaman earthquake. This is epicenter area from the BMKG. And this is several area that experiencing deformation. We can see have a difference upper fringe here, and I want to show you another. Yes. This is a deformation map of the Pasaman earthquake, 25 February. We can see this is a location of the earthquake, epicenter earthquake. This is a Sihanouk fault, and we can see here the area red. The area, the color red is indicating the area happening as subsidence, and the blue one area that's indicating the area have uplift, and the white color is I think this is a stable area, no deformation here, and this is a puzzle interferogram phase or point of the interferogram phase that is not build interferogram. I think this is a stable area, not conducting a deformation. And to the process of the deformation earthquake, we're using Sentinel-1 image that's acquisition on the 23 February, and as the master image and the slave image, the acquisition on the 7 March. 7 March. This is a deformation map. I'm sorry. Okay, this is deformation map of the pre-seismic. Okay, I will comparison between the deformation phase, pre-seismic and the post-seismic. We can see here the interferogram can be show is sharpened, and is the area that happening deformation is the externally then faster on the pre-seismic. This is I want to show you the interest area, and they will analyze is a fase seismic on the around the Lubuk Sikaping. This is with interest is this is area of Sihanouk fault here, and with interest the deformation pattern have a strike pattern here that linear with a direction of the strike fault here. So if we can see the image satellite here in the area is numbered 0.2. Here the area that's identified as the landslide. We can see it's so clear here, and I guess it's area of true faults, Sihanouk faults. Not this is a fault that I'm get from the Pusgen SHP. This is I think from the Dinsar process. I think the real of the Sihanouk fault is here. Okay, this is a deformation around the Pasaman. Pasaman is the area that suffers of the lot of damage caused by the earthquake here. We can see the deformation pattern here, the pre-seismic and the post-seismic here. This is very, very clear, but the deformation is along the highway here. This is a point, the location of the felt survey is a circle, black circle point is a location of the felt survey that have so many destructive here. I think so many landslide in several points here. This is the picture area of the Google satellite. This is a picture of the field survey that's doing by BMKG. This is the deformation area. And the next is the interested area, that is area in the Malampah Ortigonegari district. This is the first estimation as the liquefaction, but is reconfirmed by the ESDM, but it's not liquefaction, but it's a flash flood that bring material from the landslide here that we can be identified properly with a Dinsar. We can see the area of the upstream. Maybe this is the area of upstream that happening as subsidence, and maybe and the blue area is the area that have uplift because a deposit of the material of the landslide. This is I will comparison my result with a map of the residual anomaly gravity from the GGM plus data by Puslitbang BMKG. We can see the area, the red and yellow area. This is indicating have a positive residual anomaly that is associated with a strong structure of soil. And the blue ones here, it have a negative anomaly value, negative of residual anomaly here. That is associated with a weaker structure soil, weaker structure soil, I think here. And we can see several survey area is on the area that have a negative value of residual that we can see here. In some area that happening deformation is on the base of the residual anomaly gravity is on the negative value of the anomaly gravity. This is I think they have a correlation here, and this is if we see, okay, that we see the satellite's image here is this area that that have a positive anomaly, high positive anomaly, is associated with a mountain area. Maybe the lithology of here is igneous stone. Maybe the negative residual anomaly here. Maybe this maybe it's a sedimentation area here. Okay, I want to show you to see the unwrapping process uses snap hole, and this is still this is still wrap process with a deformation process. Maybe they're not similar output using snap hole with and the unwrap process with wrap process is have similar. Maybe many kind that make the snap hole maybe have a mistake from the we processing in the snap hole is very probability. Yes, this is because the successful of the snap hole or unwrapping process is dependent of the coherency value. This coherency value is a cross correlation between master image and the select image, and the value is about 0 until 1, and the limited to 0 is the indication the area that have a lower coherence, and the high this is if the value is near or closer to 1 is this is indicating that the area that have high coherence. And we can see our data is dominated with a area with a low coherence here. I can show you the coherency phase here. This is a dark area is have a low coherence, and the light area or the white area is indicating the area have a high coherence here. Okay, this is a table of the maximal deformation in the area. We can only a maximal deformation in the area in several districts. And for the discussion, the area that experiences surface deformation due to the earthquake can be identified properly using a DINSAR method. The method can be identified area that experiences a landslide due to the earthquake and occurred on 25 February. And based the result of the DINSAR processing, the area that identified as experiencing surface deformation is associated with a negative residual anomaly gravity value around the earthquake epicenter. This is indicated the weaker soil structure condition. And the deformation result from the DINSAR method is need to validate with a direct field measurement and the geodetic data to able to measure the displacement value. I think, thank you. It's enough my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, very good. Thank you very much. That was very, very comprehensive and very informative. On some of your images, I wonder which was the angle of the image from the synthetic aperture. Do you show the angle on the map? The view angle.
View angle. I'm sorry, I'm not show the angle here.
Yeah,
Yes, it's have on the result of the snap hole report, but I'm not yet to see.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so we can open this up for general discussion. We have a little time. If you want to ask, you can put in the chat box. I think this is a new topic for many people. So you're in the you're doing some of the early work of this kind in Indonesia, or at BMKG. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a question, Walter?
No, of course, you're very welcome, Hunter. Go ahead.
Hi, do you mind if I see your processing chain again, where you went through and did all the filters and things?
Yes, can you continue? Can you repeat
So,
your question?
Essentially, my question is, have you did you apply a multi-looking filter, or have you compared
Okay.
applying a multi-looking filter if you haven't done that?
Yes, I'm sorry. Maybe when I explain, I'm not explain the multi-look, but in the process here and the process of Pasaman earthquake, I'm do a multi-look too to remove the speckle noise from the SAR data.
Yeah, so essentially the multi-look, yeah, based on my knowledge, helps eliminate some of the phase noise.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you had applied that.
Yes, but I think in several processing, if the deformation caused by earthquake is usually, if we using a multi-look, this is I think the earthquake deformation is by snap processing is like a noise, I think, because it's happened is suddenly then maybe if we using a multi-look, you we will remove the interferogram that we use, that we made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so some other questions or comments? You can put in the chat box or as you like. And I had the question whether the, could we look at your slide for the pre-seismic deformation and co-seismic deformation? I was wondering what I wanted to know what was the magnitude of the deformation. How many centimeters?
Okay. Magnitude. Magnitude.
How much deformation are you finding?
Okay. And the co-seismic or pre-seismic?
Yeah, co-seismic. Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Okay.
Co-seismic.
Oh, co-seismic here.
Yeah.
Deformation that we have a maximum deformation in the past is about 3.1 in the past units, but if we convert to the distant units, it's about 13
Right.
centimeters.
13 centimeters. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty
co-seismic.
Pretty big, pretty large. Yeah, very good. It's a really good result. This is in Sumatra.
Yes.
Pasaman. Yeah. This is already the very recent earthquake. Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you.
So the floor is open for any further question. Otherwise, we have the closing ceremony coming up soon. I'll look in the chat box. Okay, here is one question. Can you explain more about the other type of radar band, what it's used for? The question coming from Norvita. Can you explain more about the other types of radar bands and how they're used? How they are used? You had a table with many radar bands. Oh, there you are.
Here you can see. In this processing, we do a Sentinel-1 image. This is using a C-band with a moderate resolution, but it have a limitation because the C-band radar C-band the C-band is cannot good penetration in the area that have a dense of vegetation canopy. So if we want to have a clear deformation with have a good in the clear deformation, maybe if our area is full with vegetation, maybe we can choose the L-band. L-band is, for example, is a Alpha satellite. This is maybe I think in Indonesia is not free. It's not free. But if you have, if you want to high resolution satellites, you can using a P-band. For example, it's a THRSDAY satellite. This is, I think, is need a payment to get the data. Why I'm choosing a Sentinel is free of charge, and we can download with from the ISS Alaska. And the band satellite that we will tune, if we need to deepest penetration, we must be to choose the band that have a long wavelength, I think. Okay.
Okay. Very good. I think that's all the time we have for questions. I'm looking in the chat box. Yes, there is another question. Hello, I would like to know how many days of data before and after the earthquake you're using to get better deformation information.
Okay, thank you, Miss Milisi. Okay, I'm to process the Pasaman earthquake and happened in 25 February. I'm using for the master image is the data with a position on the 23 February, and for the slave image we using data on the 7 March. I think it's needed a long time because we must be waiting the satellite orbit that can cover this area with the same area. I think this is very near. That is very close related. Yes, I think because we must be waiting the satellite orbit to pass the area, the same area that we must be to see the direction of the orbit satellite. If we want to process a DINSAR, maybe the direction of the satellite is this have a ascending or the descending. But if we process, we must have the same the orbit as satellite for the slave and image data. For the slave and image data, it must be the same. If we master image, we using descending. Slave image, it must be a descending too. Because it's to minimize of the error of the baseline, I think.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, Aprila. You gave a very interesting and innovative lecture, clearly illustrated and very understandable. And I think I'll turn it over now to Madonna, who will lead us in the closing ceremony.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walter-Moni.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Thank you very much, Walter. And yeah, of course, thank you very much, double Aprilia. Double Aprilia, yeah. Maybe today we have got a lot of the new things. Yeah, I think so. Hunter, you talk and show us about the subletting on the slab along Java. You explain what kind of the characteristic plate for causing the Megathrust along Sumatran Island, and so on. And Dr. Bell talked about earthquake super cycle on the Cinder Megathrust, and before you talk about it was very deeply. So you mentioned before about the right kind of the super cycle the first, and the previous I think you talk about the something like this, a topography. I think, yeah. It's generally, yeah. And the first Aprilia talked about the introduction of seismic ambient noise for Earth imaging. And as well as Aprilia, the second Aprilia, you share your research regarding how to know the deformation condition by using DINSAR, and which in general, the deformation has a function to identify the characteristics of the earthquake source to the earthquake hazard map, and is used to conduct a tsunami modeling. So I think it's a very nice presentation, and it's a great material, great topics, and the interesting discussion. So maybe time is over. So because I have to close this training. So maybe I wanna Bu Nelly.
Okay, yeah.
Ya, bisa, nggak apa-apa. Bisa kita mulai, ya.
Iya, silakan.
Yeah. So, Honorable Dr. Suko Prayitno ID, Deputy Director General for Geophysics. Good afternoon, sir. And Honorable Dr. Walter Mooney, a research geophysics at Earthquake Science Center, U.S. Geological Survey, Menlo Park, California. And Honorable Dr. Nelly Florida-Riyama, Director of the Center for Training and Education. And Honorable Dr. Supriyanto Rohadi, as the Acting Director for Director of Center for Research and Development. And Honorable for Hunter Martin, a research geologist with the USGS Earthquake Science Center in California. And Honorable for the double Aprilia from the BMKG Indonesia. And Honorable for my beloved participant of this training. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. We thank God Almighty because over the blessing and graces we can attend and the participant in this event, the closing ceremony of Advanced Earthquake and Tsunami Hazard Training course. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to the next agenda. Testimony from participant, and will be represented by Mr. Hassan Arif Effendi from Gorontalo Geophysics Station. For Mr. Hassan Arif Effendi, time is yours, please.
Halo. Oke, bisa dengar suaranya, Mbak Dona?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. Once wise men said that training proves to be key ingredients to handling any disaster. Good morning, I think, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hassan Arif Effendi from Stasiun Geofisika Gorontalo. I thank to the Master of Time who has given me a good opportunity to deliver testimonial speech in front of you all. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here in the last 3 days at this wonderful meeting. It is such an honor for me to speak on behalf of the participants. I would like to express my appreciation to Pusdiklat Badan Meteorologi, Klimatologi, and Geofisika, Mrs. Nelly Florida, Mrs. Madonna, and Mr. Chandra, and United States Geological Survey, Mr. Walter Mooney, who generously helped us make this training come true. We could not have done it without all of you. And my special thanks to those who have done their duties, delivering remarkable presentation of our program for the last 3 days. And not to forget all of participants from Sabang to Merauke. 3 days have passed quickly as an participant of Advanced Earthquake and Tsunami Hazard Training Course 2020. I'm very proud to be part of these extraordinary people that have strong understanding in recent technology of tsunami and earthquake science. My knowledge has officially upgraded. The presentation and explanation from expertise here can inspire us to work even more better back to our office and maybe have some innovation in near for coming years. Thank you for the knowledge that have been given me so far. Hopefully the thing that have been given can provide benefits in the future. And also I apologize for intentional or unintentional mistakes while attending this meeting here. From the previous presentations, we know that protecting people from natural disasters such as earthquake and tsunami require multinational cooperation. And of course, it is our responsibility. Finally, hopefully we always have spirit in unity and we have only one earth. Unite, some Indonesian proverb says, bersatu kita teguh, bercerai kita runtuh. It means that united we firmly, divorced we collapse. This proverb is very meaning. With united will be steadfast and strong. All the challenges and obstacles that come in your way and my way. In contrast, we divorced, lost or not united, it will be very easily we fail and collapsed. One message from me: stop the war and violence, spread love and peace. Let's make this world better place by solving earthquake and tsunami research problem. Please, once more, forgive us for the mistake you might have during the program ongoing. We hope that see you all again in the next meeting, and I hope this collaboration is never end. I think that's enough. Goodbye, everybody, and see you then. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Hassan Arif Effendi, for the great impression of advanced earthquake and tsunami hazard training course. And ladies and gentlemen, we are going to the main agenda, I think. So, closing remark by Deputy Director General for Geophysics and officially close advanced earthquake and tsunami hazard training course. For the Honorable Bapak Dr. Suko Prayitno Adi, time is yours.
Yeah, good morning, Dr. Walter Muni. Thank you. Dr. Nelly Florida, Dr. Bapak Bambang Suprianto, Rahmat Riono, dan juga Dr. Suprianto Hadi, Director of our Center Research and Development, trainer and instructor, distinguished guests and participants, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that all of you have well done through the 3-day training. It is my great pleasure that you had a fruitful discussion through. I think 3 days are not enough. In this year training, whose main theme is the advanced hazard earthquake and tsunami, I expected that every participant could enhance understanding of the following aspect of Indonesia natural hazard, including recent event, namely seismic network operation, occurrence and mechanism of earthquake and tsunami, as well as earthquake, induced liquefaction, and landslide. I would like to pay my deep respect to all participants for your positive participation in this training. I hope that what you have learned through the training would help and support you a lot in your studies and lead to stability of the region and the future. Distinguished guest participant, it is nice to hear the training team leader has spoken warmly about your desire to learn, the active learning that you have modeled, as well as your effort at seizing the opportunity to learn new strategy. I thank you for your enthusiastic participation and the activities. I also am very happy to know that participant has learned a lot from every single lecture. I hope that the result of the training will boost your confidence and inspire you to extend the knowledge into further study, research, or furthermore, the related implementation operation work. I do believe that understanding new knowledge won't to be power unless we use it to improve the quality of our work and the public services. Distinguished trainer, course participant, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, I would like to express my appreciation and gratitude to all those who have contributed to make this event a success as expected. I would like to underline that this training would not have been possible without the interest and support of the Dr. Nelly Florida and Dr. Walter Moni and Dr. Supriyato Rohadi. I am also grateful to USGS, USAID, and BMKG committee for their great contribution in supporting this training. Last but not least, at this very good moment, I would like to close my remark and officially announce the end of the Advanced Hazard Earthquake and Tsunami Training course. I wish you all the success in the near future. Thank you for your kind attention. Stay safe and healthy during this pandemic. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you, Bapak Dr. Suko Prayitno for the speech and for officially closing Advanced Earthquake and Tsunami Hazard Training course. Ladies and gentlemen, on the last agenda, we will hold a photo session to all audiences. I invite you to kindly turn on your camera video, please. And I will take some screenshot, please. Hitungan ketiga. For the count of 3, give your best smile. 1, 2, 3. And the last slide. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah, it's done. And we finish. Thank you for your attention. And ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of the closing ceremony for the Advanced Earthquake and Tsunami Hazard Training course. On behalf of the organizing committee, I will say thanks to all audiences, and of course, thanks for the Dr. Walter Moni for your supporting. For your kind attendance today. Hopefully we can meet again in the future opportunity. Hopefully we can meet again in another opportunity, and BMKG can collaborate again with the MKG USG training course for the next future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Deputi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Deputi. Thank you, Pak Muni.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you, Pak Supri. Makasih teman-teman semua, luar biasa.
Ya, sehat semua ya. Salam semua seluruh Indonesia.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Walter, we have to prepare the next training about ground motion.
Oh, ground motion.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ya, terima kasih Bapak Ibu semuanya. Untuk para peserta, mohon untuk mengerjakan post-testnya, dan post-test akan dibuka sudah dari pukul 11 ya sampai dengan jam 3 sore, karena post-test ini merupakan salah satu syarat teman-teman untuk kita dapat mengeluarkan sertifikatnya, ya. Izin
Terima
untuk.
kasih Mbak Dona.
Oh ya, terima kasih Bu Nelly. Terima kasih Bu Nelly.
Akhirnya selesai juga.
Amin Bu, amin Bu, 3 hari. Saya nggak kebayang kalau 1 minggu. Luar biasa pusingnya.
Iya. Terima kasih semua teman-teman ya, semangat. Mudah-mudahan ada yang bisa berangkat ke USGS ini.
Amin. Bisa buat yang nilainya bagus-bagus ya Bu ya.
Ya, nanti kita seleksi.
Oke. Mulai semangat nih.
Iya, nanti kita nganterin Mbak Dona, jadi mereka yang training ya kan.
Benar Bu ya. Mereka yang menyiapin bahannya, Bi ya.
Jadi teman-teman harus semangat.
Ikut nganter boleh nggak, Bu?
Enggak, ikut training kamu mah. Kan tadi udah speech. Keren banget itu speech-nya.
Udah belajar ya.
Google.
Udah disiapin sama dia.
Dikasih tahu sebelumnya ya. Bu Nelly, terima kasih banyak nih Bu Nelly atas dukungannya. Jadi Bapak Ibu jangan lupa ya. Nanti saya jangan lupa ya prosesnya dan saya end meeting for all ya dalam hitungan yang ketiga ya. 1, 2,